11 or 12 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh
That
yeah.
that does make it seem fairly
Okay,
unsustainable.
here's another little factoid. If fertility remained at current levels, the population would reach the absurd figure of 296 billion in just another 150 years. Even if fertility rates dropped from the current 3 per couple to 2.5 children per woman, then stop falling, the population would still reach 28 billion in the next 150 years. That's assuming that the death rate doesn't go up, right?
Right.
At the current death rate. So I mean, what that's going to tell you is that even in a best case scenario, where do you really think we're going to be able to get the birth rate down to 2.5 children per woman in the third world? I don't see that really. Um, anyway,
Well, another thing that Stephen Harper likes to do is go to war in different places. So,
yeah, that's one
you
way to
know,
get the death rate up.
yeah,
Um, in certain places, you didn't need to get the death rate up, but you did. For example, Libya. Libya had a very westernized birth rate. Okay, it's a country that's approximately the same size as the Sudan, except for the Sudan had 10 times more people,
right. There's 6 million people in Libya, I believe.
and there's about 80 million in Sudan. If
Right.
Yeah, and so it just goes to show, right? The Sudan, which is basically a failed state, which is has ongoing civil war, and Libya, which was stable and prospering for the last 40 years, um, where it was illegal to discriminate based on gender. One of the only African countries that was a functioning state that had such a law. Certainly, none of the puppet regimes that we prop up, I say we as I mean NATO countries prop up,
Right.
could say the same. For example, Saudi Arabia. You know, I mean,
Women aren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, I don't
they're not
believe.
allowed to go out of the house without male company, and if they do, they have to wear a full burqa.
This is one of the reasons why Muammar Gaddafi was actually disliked by a small segment of his population. Uh, he, without taking sides here, he did offend the severe Islamic portion of Libyan
Exactly.
society.
And
And
what is sorry for interrupting you, man, but
no, no, that's fine.
what has
All
come
I
to
was going to finish saying there
yeah.
was that he managed to balance a mixture of Islamic, not fundamentalism, Islamic religion with secularism, and it really left a bitter taste in a lot of more radical Islamic people in Libya. And that's what Muammar Gaddafi had been dealing with since 1996 and been putting down uprisings and
Mm-hmm.
people who were out murdering police officers and attacking army bases. So,
You want to hear? You want to know how absurd our efforts were in Libya, where we went to the assistance of an armed uprising, okay, on behalf of the same people, the exact same type of people that were fighting in Afghanistan, or we were up until a couple months ago.
exactly.
And even while this was going on, no one in NATO really denied the fact that the rebels had strong ties to Al Qaeda.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
Gaddafi was criticized at first for claiming that there was an Al Qaeda presence within the quote unquote revolution in Libya. And lo and behold, now it's common knowledge that the Libyan Islamic fighting group was a key element in the whole revolution. And the vast majority of those fighters were released from prison under an agreement by the minister. Was it Jabril or Jalil? The one that was the justice minister. He was the one who made sure these people were released from jail, and they were released from these jails and prisons with the agreement that they wouldn't take part in active revolt against the state of Libya. And then who forms the NTC and who takes up arms? I mean, this whole thing just reeks all the way through. And and they have Sharia law now in Libya.
Yes, exactly. NTC announced earlier this week, and ladies, get ready with those. You didn't have to have them when Gaddafi was in power, but get your burqas out, get your veils out, because Sharia law is going to be the law. And guess what? The NTC says, "Don't worry, we're moderate Muslims. It'll be a moderate version of Sharia law that we implement in Libya." Well, here's the deal: Sharia cannot coexist with democracy. Otherwise, what you have is is what you have in Iran. The same democracy you have in Iran. Ahmadinejad, or whatever his name is simply
Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad. Yeah. Uh,
Ahmadinejad.
yeah. Okay. Guy. Yeah. The guy that always gets on TV and says, I'm going to nuke Libya or Israel as soon as I can, and all this stuff. The crazy guy that
Yeah, or
he's
his
simply a mouthpiece,
misinterpretations at
right?
least say that.
He's democratically elected in Iran. They love him. But here's the thing: he has no power whatsoever because in Iran it's Sharia law, and the clerics have all the power in any situation where there's Sharia law. The NTC may come out and say that yes, we're a moderate form, we'll employ a moderate form of Sharia,
Hmm.
but they don't have the right to say it because they also say that any law that we pass that is in contradiction to Sharia is null
Then
and
it's
void,
null and void.
right?
Yeah.
So what's going to happen is there's going to be the clerics who interpret Sharia and delete the laws passed by the supposedly democratically elected government whenever it conflicts with what they interpret Sharia to be. So, interesting.
It just goes to show too that when people in Western countries, talk about bringing democracy to other parts of the world, they shouldn't be so arrogant to think that people in other parts of the world are going to apply democracy in the exact same way that it was applied and that it grew and had actual roots and developed over time. You can't actually hold it against people from a different culture for approaching their politics from a different way too. If this honestly is what people in different countries want, then it's not really our right to go in and say no, you should be like this, or your democracy has to be this way. But also, we shouldn't approach them and be so idealistic in thinking that in spreading quote unquote democracy and freedom to people that they get the same thing that we get. You know, there
Yeah,
it's not going to
it's incredibly
happen.
naive, and I hate for us to keep on bringing up Libya because you know what? Not many people agree with us on this subject. I hate to keep on bringing it up for fear of turning off our listeners, who I know for the most part won't be agreeing with us right now, because we think that anytime we fight another country in the name of democracy and freedom, that we've done the
Yeah.
right thing. But here's the thing: they're not going to get democracy. They're not going to get freedom. They're going to have their resources stolen from them. Okay, their water
Hmm.
and their oil will be stolen. Okay, they're going to get civil war along tribal lines, and they're going to get Sharia law. There may be a pretend election, right? Kind of like
Hmm.
Afghanistan, because keep in mind that the democracy we fought to uphold in Afghanistan is a complete sham.
Oh,
You
it's a
know,
sham for sure.
Karzai, it's not even in dispute. The facts are not in dispute. He stole the last election, and he legalized rape within marriage. So these are only two things you really need to know to understand
Well,
we should not have
the
been there meddling
And the
in their
third one I
affairs.
would add would be, where did Hamid Karzai come from? Where did he work for? Who did he work for before he became the president of a liberated Afghanistan?
The
He worked for an
CIA,
oil company
the CIA,
and the CIA, of course. I mean, those two industries are completely
yeah,
combined.
and that's not
Um,
really. Just Google it, guys. Like, I mean,
yeah,
just Google
it's
it.
not something that's up for question. It's an actual fact.
Yeah,
It's easy to find.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I hate to keep on bringing up Libya, but of course, now the whole thing has to be whitewashed too, right? Because the United Nations, certain elements within the United Nations that care about truth and justice, are demanding investigations into the NTC's war crimes. First of all, one thing that's glaring and recent is the murder of Muammar Gaddafi,
Hmm.
right? And
Even
so,
Stephen Harper has come out and in his own words said that he can't be happy about the rule of law being so violated like that, and using terms like assassinating. He was like, again, Stephen Harper's statement here, I'm not completely condoning, because here was a guy who supported the Libya intervention, who is so avidly interested
hmm,
in attaching himself to American foreign
yeah,
policy, and even he can see that that was a little bit brutal at the end.
yeah. Well, here's the thing. I
But
mean, the
where does
NTC's.
NATO stand on this?
Where's NATO stand on it? Well, they have to have
Well, I was
this.
just going to say NATO decided that after Muammar Gaddafi had been brutally murdered, that that was good for them and that they're going to pull out.
Right.
That
the NTC has come out with a cover story. They said that they captured that Gaddafi was captured alive, and the person who pulled the trigger on him, who killed him, was one of his own guys. Okay,
Right.
which is conceivable. I could see that Gaddafi may or may not want to be captured alive, and he might have had orders to his guys to say, well, if they're in the process of taking me, shoot me.
The
I
thing
could
that
see
doesn't
that.
make any sense with that, though, is anybody close to him at that point who was not an NTC rebel. How did they manage not to disarm these people?
Yeah,
And you see in the video the one person brandishing the gun right by his
yeah,
head.
Mike.
There are.
I'll tell you why the story makes absolutely no sense. Because if the NTC rebels were adhering to basic the Geneva Convention and how to handle a
Mhm,
prisoner of war. Okay,
mhm,
well, that's one thing.
yep.
Maybe Gaddafi's men pulled the trigger, but how do you explain the pictures of Gaddafi right before he was killed being sodomized with a knife?
That's what I was just going to say. I'm
Yeah,
so glad you said
yeah,
that. They sodomized him
yeah.
with a
So
knife.
I could believe, I could believe that Gaddafi might have said to his guys, "If I'm being taken alive and I can't do anything about it myself, as in I just can't get my gun in my mouth, Can you shoot me in the head?" You know what I mean? I don't believe he said, "And before you do that, can you sodomize me with a knife?"
Right.
So it makes like,
Yeah.
you know,
And
you know,
and the other two things that the other two things, and again, now this gets into some speculation and it's not verified, but the other thing that's in question is NATO forces on the ground. Well, one thing we know is Qatar has now come out and acknowledged that they had several hundred troops on the ground in Libya during this whole uprising.
yeah,
Now, secondly, another thing that came out of uh, there's an intelligence clearinghouse, an Israeli intelligence clearinghouse called Debka. I'm going to have to get the link for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
I'll make
But you
sure
know
we
what?
post it
Let
in
me
the
throw
show.
the brakes on right now because before we
Yeah.
get too in depth with information, I wanted to bring up, progress in Libya in broad strokes and hang this,
Yeah.
to coin a term made famous by Conrad Black, like a used toilet seat around the neck of NATO commanders. You
Right.
know what I mean? That's how this information is being worn by NATO right now. And just thought we'd update our listeners in case they had doubts from before whether or not this was a just cause.
Right.
And that basically brings us to, what's happening for the rest of this show?
Well, the only other two things that I'd like to mention in passing have more to do with North America. First of all, I think we should mention in passing Scott Olson in Occupy Oakland. He was a Marine and a veteran. Did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. Came home, got involved in the Veterans Against the War movement. Took part in Occupy Oakland, and was shot in the face and got a fractured skull from
Excellent.
Oakland Police
Yeah.
Department.
And thankfully, recent reports have indicated that a full recovery is very possible for Scott. And this
Hmm.
is something that we can discuss later in the show,
Yeah, we'll get
in
to that later
concert
when we.
with, we're going to be discussing
Yeah,
the
that's why
Occupy
I just
movement.
wanted to say it in
Yeah.
passing. And other than that, the only other thing before we get to our guests, I would just like to add also another candidate has come forward in the NDP leadership race. Peggy Nash has
Yeah.
announced her leadership contention.
Yeah.
So we have 8 now, and it's good to see Peggy Nash out there, and it's nice to see a woman as an option in the NDP leadership race.
You had to say
And like,
that, eh? You had to say that.
yeah. And I
Why
mean,
is it a
I know
big deal?
Peggy
Why is it
Nash
a
will
big
play
deal?
that angle down and say she's not running as a woman, she's running
Yeah.
as a candidate, and I think that's what makes her an even better candidate.
A lot of the coverage I have seen has said, "Oh, thankfully there's a woman." You know what I mean? What difference does it make?